Greetings clay crew. In this video I'm going to show you 3 ways to make some hand-built salt and pepper shakers. Supplies you'll need for this project are some water, a carving tool so you can dig stuff out, a wooden knife, a needle tool, some kind of fettling knife, or I have this surgical blade, which is very useful and nice and sharp. I also have these wipeout tools, which if you don't have the little regular wipeout tools, you can use a wooden knife, but I've got these available, so I'm going to use them. I've also got a couple different kinds of ribs, a serrated one or smooth one, and 2 mud tool ribs, also a finishing sponge, and another carving tool with a little hook on it. Also got a brush for cleaning up, and you'll need some corks later on for your salt and pepper shakers. I've also got 2 sponges here to use as props. First thing I did for my first set of salt and pepper shakers is I weighed out 2 pounds of clay and split the ball into 2 equal parts. And then I tapped the bottom of one, and you can see I'm just rolling out the edges to kind of get my salt and pepper shaker shape. And I'm using my needle tool to carve my cloud. So I'm just making some circles where I know my kind of cloud bubbles are going to be. And I'm just switching up the shapes, changing them around, and I'm just giving a quick kind of etch of where I know I want them to be. Depending on how wet your clay is, you may or may not be able to start carving right away into your clay. If it is fresh out of the bag and it's a brand new bag, I would suggest making your ball and then setting it in front of the fan for a while. During class, this might be just like an hour in front of the fan, and then you can carve for the second hour, or you can just lightly wrap it up, and maybe this is something that you take home to work on, because carving is something you can do while you're sitting in front of the telly. Next, I'm going to take my other carving tool and start carving away the negative space around my circles. So I've got this carving tool that's kind of got a hook end on it, and I like this one because it kind of wraps around the curve that I'm trying to make. And I just find that I can get more out as I go. So I'm going to go ahead and just carve around each of my bubbles and start to reveal their shape a little bit more. This is going to take some time, especially depending on how soft or hard your clay is. You might need to carve away a layer, then stick it in front of the fan for a while, then carve away another layer. If your clay is squishing out of shape while you're working with it, then it is too wet. And if your tool is scratching and you're only getting little crumbles and dust, then it's too dry. After initially carving and etching out my circles for my cloud, I'm going to start carving away more. I'm trying to round these out to look more like the cloud, bulbous cloud shape. And I'm doing this by just kind of slowly etching away at the corners and making it an easier transition from one another, so it's not a straight up and down gully in between each piece. They're gonna each flow into each other. This all is gonna take some time. In total, it took me just over 2 hours from carving to finishing for these salt and pepper shakers, and that's for 2 salt and pepper shakers. So you can get one done in an hour from start to finish. But it'll take you at least 2 hours to make both. And that's, taking your time, not rushing through it and going back and editing and everything. So if you find any areas where you might have a dimple or you think it needs an extra little bubble, you can slip and score a bit of clay on there. Just make sure to let it dry before trying to carve that piece as well, because now you've added some softer clay to your piece. For the foot of my salt and pepper shakers, I decided to carve out a little foot so it's raised, and I just used my same little hook carving tool to make a little raised foot. After I was happy with my carving, I used my finger just to smooth everything out initially, getting rid of any little boogers and filling in any little spaces that I did not mean to carve out. This is just with a dry finger. I don't have any water on my hands right now. Next, I'm going to use my little wipeout tools, which you can use if you've got a wooden rib or wooden knife tool. Can be useful for this, but I like these little rubber wipeout tools, are nice and useful, and I can be a little bit more precise with my smoothing and get into all the little crevices. Make sure to constantly be cleaning your tool. If you have a bunch of clay, dried clay on your tool, you're just going to reintroduce that into whatever you're working on. So I'm constantly wiping my tool off, because whenever I do not, I end up with little boogers all over my clay that I then have to clean again. So after carving and cleaning up, I decided that I wanted to add some more irregular little bubbles that were jutting out. You know how clouds, they're not a perfect round shape. They have lots of little odd bubbles everywhere. So I just used some bits of clay and I slipped and scored on some little knobbies in different places that would create some extra dimension. You just need to smooth them out and try and line them up with the bubble that's underneath them. So it can make it look like it's an extra bubble on the edge, or you can just add clay to make your bubble a little bit larger. After I've attached all my little bubbles, I just cleaned up with my finishing sponge to smooth everything out and help all the surfaces be a little bit more even and blend together. And then I left these to dry overnight, or for you guys it might be a week if you're doing it in between classes. And you want to let them set up a little bit more so they're closer to, if you're comparing it to cheese, it might be a Parmesan. This will make it easier to do your finishing touches, smoothing out any rough corners that you've got. You can use your finger or a sponge if it is a harsher corner. But next I am going to start carving out my bottom and the inside, because this is a solid piece of clay that we've carved around, and we need the inside to be hollow so we have somewhere to put our salt and pepper. So I've just etched out with my needle tool how large of a hole I need to make. We're going to be attaching some clay here later, so it's okay to make the hole a little bit bigger, just so you can easily carve everything out of the inside. I'm using my loop tool and just digging everything out. I'm not going too quickly, and I'm being careful to make sure I don't puncture through my walls anywhere. So this is where having it be a firmer piece of clay at this point is better, because then I'm not squishing any of my carved design on the outside while I'm carving out the inside, or hollowing out the inside. If you do make a boo-boo and have a little spot that you carved and punctured through by accident, that's okay, don't panic. Take a pause and take a little pinch of clay and just slip and score that from the outside or from the inside, wherever, and just blend that in with the rest of your shape. And then just don't carve in that section anymore, because it's done, it's ready. Take your time to try and smooth out the inside a little bit so it's not just a bunch of jagged ridges in there. All of that will cause your salt or pepper to get kind of lodged inside, so the smoother the inside, the better. Next, I use my needle tool to puncture my pepper holes. This one's for my pepper because I want more pepper to come out, but that's to your liking. Usually the pepper is 3 holes and the salt is 1. But these are yours, so however many holes you need to supply you with your pepper is how many you should put in your pepper shaker. But I'm cleaning out the hole and making sure it's a little bit larger than I want it to be, because remember, the clay is going to shrink. And then next we're going to seal up the bottom. So I just used some scrap clay to make a little cookie. That is just the same size as my bottom, and first I measured it to try and make it the same size, and I slipped and scored and brought the 2 pieces together, and I've created a little indent in the middle because later on when we're adding our cork, we need a little space for the cork to jut out, so you can be able to pull your cork out and refill your salt and pepper shaker. So I'm just smoothing the bottom and getting it to stick. After letting the bottom set up for a little bit, you can take one of your carving tools. I use this kind of corkscrew carving tool to drill a little hole in the middle there of it, and then I use my loop tool to carve out the sides and make it a little bit wider, because you want to be able to pour your salt and pepper into that opening, as well as fit your cork that you'll be making later. So I just carved it out and cleaned it up, making sure to smooth out my edges. If I have a bunch of jagged pieces hanging off, those are going to be really sharp once they're fired. So I want to make sure I clean those up. For my slab built salt and pepper shaker, I first made a little template of a cloud, and trace that onto a slab of clay 4 times. You'll need 2 sides for each shaker. And I always trace, and then after I remove my template, then I cut it out. That way I can preserve my template for longer. I then took each cloud and I pinched the edge to make a nice rounded edge of the tops of the clouds. You don't have to do the bottom, but I did all the tops, and this will help later when we're joining them together to create more of a beveled edge, and I won't have such a chunky top. And these are going to come together, and I want there to be space in between them, right? Because it's not just going to be a flat envelope. So I cradle the little clouds in my hand, and I use my finger to kind of scoop the inside and help it stretch out some. So these are then going to come together. I realized my sides didn't match up, so I had to reverse where my direction my stretching would be, just because the template isn't perfectly symmetrical on both sides. So if you haven't created a perfectly symmetrical template, just make sure you're joining your sides correctly so they match up. And I'm just slowly pinching this together, bringing the form closer and closer to each other. So when I go to slip and score, it'll match up, and I don't have to do too much finagling. But I'll use my serrated rib to score just the top edges where it's going to join, and just a little bit of water for my slip, and then bring the 2 pieces together. And then I'm just gently pinching. I don't want to change my shape at all. I want to keep my little cloud tufts on the top there. So I'm just going to gently pinch and smooth it out. This is another good time to use your wipeout tool or your wooden knife tool to help smooth out and blend your seam together. If you want to keep the seam there, you can use your tool and just run it down the seam completely. I wanted to just smooth mine out, so that's what I did. And then don't forget to address the inside seam as well. You should run your tool along the seam on the inside and try and blend it together as best you can, and that'll make it a little bit stronger. I did go back and add a little coil to the bottom inside of the seam just to strengthen that little joint there, because I was worried about it cracking. It kept pulling apart a little bit. So it doesn't hurt to add just a little coil and then blend it in. And it's just a little snake that you add to the seam. And this is good for a lot of projects to do. I'm sorry, it's a little off camera. For the bottoms of these salt and pepper shakers, I just used part of my slab that I hadn't cut up and traced the bottoms. And then again, I did the same thing where I pinched the edges and then joined them together. And so pinching that edge kind of extended my slab a little bit, which is what I want, because I want to create a little bit of a skirt from the foot. So once I get that on there, I'm wiggling my score marks together, right, to get it to stick really well. But I'm just rocking my piece to lift that pinched edge and let it kind of join with the side of the clay, and that creates my little decorative skirt for my foot. And then, like my other one, I am pushing on the inside of my foot to deepen it to create a little gap, and that's my space where I'll be able to put my cork in without making the piece unstable, because if I don't create this space, then the cork is gonna jut out and you won't be able to let your salt and pepper sit flat on the table. And of course, don't forget your salt and pepper shaker holes using your needle tool. And then super simple for the pinched one, I did the same thing as my carve piece where I took one ball of clay and split it into 2 even pieces. This is probably just a pound though, it's not as big as the 2 pieces for the carving because I'm going to be pinching this and that's going to make these larger. So I make my ball nice and sturdy and then I stick my thumb in there and start pinching, and I always tell people that quack your hand like a duck and just keep turning and pinching and moving up and down the walls of your piece. And as it gets larger, you can use your finger to kind of swoop and push the clay against your palm using just your finger, and that will help speed up the process. But you want to go slow and control your shape, so I keep checking it and looking what it's going to look like when I place it down. And then I'm just trying to make all my walls even, so I don't have extra thick walls next to extra skinny walls, because that can cause issues later while drying and can cause cracking. Once I've got my little domes finished, these are nice and simple. I'm just going to set them up in front of the fan so they're a little bit firmer and I can start smoothing them out. So I use my red rib tool to start smoothing the outside and scrape off a lot of my ridges caused by my fingers pinching the clay. And this is a step you can skip if you like all those marks. I don't hate them, I just wanted them to be a little bit more subtle. Then of course you gotta add your holes, and then same as the other piece where I used a slab to trace and cut out my bottom for the salt and pepper shaker, and I just cut away the excess until it was all gone, and then took some time to blend and again push in that middle of my bottom where the cork is going to end up. And then I just used my tools to continue to smooth and make the base match the rest of my piece so it all looks like it's one solid piece. Alright, and that's all for this video. In the next one I will show you how I made a little salt and pepper caddy out of a slab, and we'll review the different glazing techniques I used for the salt and pepper shakers. Thanks for watching. See you in the studio.